Beneath the fractured moon, a single drop of blood froze into a crimson gem upon the snow, whispering of wounds that refused to heal. Alara stumbled through the whispering pines, her breath a ragged ghost in the freezing night. The wind clawed at her threadbare cloak, carrying the distant howls of the pack that had cast her out. Rejection burned deeper than the winter's bite. It was a blade twisted in the soul, severing ties forged in the cradle of the wild. She was Omega, born to soothe the pack's frayed edges, yet they had named her Curse, a harbinger of weakness in a time of war. The Alpha's decree echoed in her mind. You bring only shadows to our fire. Banished at dawn, left to the mercy of the borderlands where blizzards devoured the unwary, she clutched the one remnant of her life. A silver locket, etched with lunar phases, that hung heavy against her chest. Inside, a lock of her mother's hair, stained faintly with the blood of a forgotten rite. It was her anchor, this blood locket, a symbol of the devotion she could no longer give. The snow fell thicker now, veiling the world in a shroud of white silence. Alara's bare feet bled into the drifts, each step a testament to her unraveling. The forest loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky as if pleading with the indifferent stars. She had always felt the pull of the moon, a subtle thrum in her veins that guided her through the pack's tempests. But tonight, under its bloated gaze, that pull twisted into despair. Why had the goddess marked her so? Omegas were meant to mend, to weave the threads of fury into harmony, yet her touch had only invited chaos. Whispers in the longhouse spoke of her visions, fleeting glimpses of futures steeped in blood that had foretold the pack's recent skirmishes. They blamed her for the losses, for the Alpha's son who returned from the massacre broken, his wolf silenced forever. She collapsed against a frost-rimed boulder, the cold seeping into her bones like accusation. The wind howled a dirge, stirring memories of warmer nights by the hearth, where flames danced and laughter bridged the divides. Now, exile stripped her bare, leaving only the raw ache of abandonment. Tears froze on her lashes, and she pressed the locket to her lips, tasting the metallic tang of resolve. "Goddess," she murmured, her voice swallowed by the gale, "if this is my path, let it lead to something beyond pain." But the moon offered no reply, only its pale light pooling on the snow like spilled milk from a shattered vessel. Hours blurred into eternity as she pressed onward, the terrain rising into jagged foothills where the air thinned to a knife's edge. Her body screamed for rest, but survival was a cruel mistress demanding tribute in blood and will. The locket swung with each labored breath, its chain a noose of sentiment. She remembered the day it was given, her mother's hands, calloused from tending the pack's wounded, fastening it around her neck. "This holds our bloodline's fire," she'd said, eyes gleaming with unspoken secrets. "It will guide you when the shadows close." Now that fire felt extinguished, reduced to embers beneath the weight of betrayal. A low growl pierced the night, freezing Alara in place. Her heart thundered, a wild drum against her ribs. Wolves? Or something worse, the rival packs that prowled these wastes. Hungry for territory soaked in the blood of the fallen? She scanned the tree line, shadows twisting like specters under the moon's scrutiny. Nothing stirred, yet the air thickened with an unnatural tension, as if the forest itself held its breath. She backed away, boots crunching softly on the ice-crusted ground, but the growl came again, closer, laced with a pain that resonated in her core. Crouching low, she slipped behind a cluster of evergreens, their needles sharp as thorns. The wind shifted, carrying a scent, musk and iron, blood and despair. Not a beast, but a man, or what remained of one. Alara's instincts flared, the Omega within her stirring like a dormant flame. She should flee. The borderlands were no place for mercy. Yet curiosity, that treacherous spark, rooted her. Peering through the branches, she glimpsed him, a figure staggering from the gloom, broad-shouldered and cloaked in ragged furs, stained dark with what could only be gore. His face was half hidden by a hood, but the moonlight caught the glint of eyes, tormented silver, like storm clouds over snow. He collapsed mere feet away, a guttural groan escaping his lips as he clawed at the earth. No shift rippled through him. No wolf emerged to heal the wounds that wept crimson into the white. Ilara's breath caught. This was no ordinary wanderer. The tales of the Alpha King's son flickered in her mind. Kale, the heir who had led the charge against the invading hordes, only to return shattered from the massacre at Frostvale Pass. They said the slaughter had stolen his beast, leaving him half a man, haunted by the ghosts of those he'd failed to save. Guilt, they whispered, was his chain, heavier than any iron. She should leave him to the night. He was Pack, enemy by association, a symbol of the power that had discarded her. But as he writhed, the locket warmed against her skin, pulsing with an insistent heat. The blood within seemed to stir, calling to the blood spilling from his side. Ilara's hand trembled as she reached out, then drew back. Fear warred with an inexplicable pull, the moon above bearing witness to her dilemma. What strength was there in turning away, or in stepping into the fray of another's ruin? The wind howled louder, as if urging her forward, and in that moment, under the unblinking eye of the goddess, Ilara made her choice. She crept closer, the snow muffling her approach, her heart a fragile bridge between exile and unknown fate. Ilara's fingers brushed the snow-dusted fur of his cloak, the touch sending a jolt through her like lightning veiled in frost. He was heavier than she expected, his body a fortress of muscle and scar, unyielding even in collapse. The metallic scent of blood thickened the air, mingling with the pine's sharp bite and the earth's frozen musk. She dragged him toward a shallow hollow beneath an overhanging ledge, her arms burning with the effort. Every inch gained a battle against the wind's relentless siege. The moon hung low, its silver gaze dissecting the scene, casting elongated shadows that danced like wary spirits around them. Kale's breath came in shallow rasps, his chest heaving beneath the ragged layers. Up close, the torment in his eyes was a chasm, silver irises fractured by grief, pupils dilated against the pain. A gash marred his side, deep and jagged, as if clawed by an enemy's fury rather than healed by the shift that should have claimed him. No wolf's growl rumbled from his throat. Only a man's anguish, raw and human, escaped in fractured whispers. Ilara knelt beside him, her hands hovering, uncertain. The locket at her throat pulsed warmer now, its blood-tainted core thrumming in rhythm with his faltering heartbeat. It was no mere trinket. In this moment, it felt alive, a bridge across the void of their shared isolation. Who? His voice was gravel, laced with suspicion, as he tried to push her away. But weakness betrayed him, his hand falling limp into the snow, fingers curling around a crimson stain that bloomed like a winter rose. Ilara flinched, the instinctive pull warring with the fear coiling in her gut. He was the Alpha King's son, heir to the throne that had condemned her, a living emblem of the power that crushed the weak. Tales of his valor at Frostvale Pass painted him as unbreakable, yet here he lay, stripped of his beast, a king without his crown. Curiosity flickered despite the dread. Why had the massacre silenced his wolf? What ghosts clawed at him now, denying the moon's call? She tore a strip from her cloak, the fabric ripping with a sound like distant thunder, and pressed it to his wound. The warmth of his blood seeped through, sticky and vital, staining her skin in intimate accusation. "Quiet," she murmured, her voice a thread of calm amid the storm. "The wind carries ears." Her own heart raced, a wild thing trapped in ice as she worked. Touching him ignited something primal, an Omega's instinct to mend what was torn, yet she rationalized it away. Mercy was survival's guise, nothing more. The connection hummed beneath her denial, a subtle current from the locket, as if the blood within recognized its kin in his spilling life. Cale's gaze locked on hers, sharp despite the haze of pain. You, smell of the pack, eastern borders. Accusation laced his words. But there was no strength to rise, no command to enforce. He winced as she tightened the makeshift bandage, his body arching involuntarily. The snow around them glittered under the lunar light, each flake a tiny mirror reflecting their fragile tableau, exile and heir, bound by circumstance in the wild's indifferent embrace. Ilara met his stare, her own eyes dark pools of resolve, shadowed by doubt. Fear whispered of betrayal. What if he recognized her, the Omega-branded curse? Curiosity held her fast, urging her to unravel the enigma before her. His scent enveloped her, salt of sweat, iron of blood, and beneath it, a faint wildness, muted but unbroken. "Why help?" he rasped, his hand brushing hers in a fleeting grasp, sending warmth through the cold. The contact lingered too long, electric, stirring the air between them. Ilara pulled back, the locket cooling against her skin, as if chiding her retreat. "Because the goddess doesn't choose sides in the snow," she replied, the words tasting of half-truth. In truth, it was the pull, instinctive and unwelcome, that rooted her. Omegas were woven for such moments, to soothe the Alpha's tempests, but she had been cast out for it. This felt like defiance, a spark against the void. The wind howled anew, carrying faint weavos from the distant ridges, pursuers, perhaps, or echoes of the massacre that haunted him. Kyle's face paled further, his body tensing as if bracing for an unseen blow. Ilara scanned the tree line, the forest's shadows deepening into threats. The moon climbed higher, its light pooling on his wounds like liquid silver, mocking the absence of his shift. She should leave now, vanish into the night before his strength returned and questions turned to rejection. Yet the locket warmed again, an insistent whisper of fate, and curiosity bloomed into something perilously close to empathy. Who was this broken prince? Felled not by blade, but by the weight of his own guilt? He groaned, clutching at the snow, his fingers digging furrows that wept red into white. The full moon. It comes, and I can't. The confession hung between them, vulnerable as exposed flesh. Ilara's breath caught. The tale spoke of his curse, the wolf locked away after Frostvale, where rivers of blood had drowned his pack's cries. The massacre's shadow clung to him, a spectral chain. She felt it then, the instinctive bond fraying her defenses, fear of his world clashing with the curiosity of his pain. The connection was there, nascent and denied, born not of desire, but of the raw necessity in his eyes. As the storm gathered force, battering the ledge with icy fists, Ilara made no move to flee. The blood locket dangled like a talisman, its chain swaying in the gale, binding her to this moment of uncertain alliance. Under the moon's watchful eye, the encounter unfolded, a fragile thread in the tapestry of their exiles, where fear and curiosity wove the first knots of what might become redemption or ruin. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm raged like a beast unchained, its howls drowning the fragile rhythm of their breaths beneath the ledge. Ilara huddled closer to Cale, the overhang shielding them from the worst of the blizzard's fury, but not from the cold that clawed at their edges. His blood soaked through the bandage, warm and insistent against her thigh where she pressed to staunch the flow, the metallic tang mingling with the sharp resin of pine and the faint underlying musk of his unshifted form. The blood locket rested heavy between her breasts, its pulse now a steady thrum, syncing with the labored rise and fall of his chest, as if the ancient rite within recognized the life ebbing from him, urging her to hold fast. She scanned the tree line beyond their hollow, shadows twisting under the moon's fractured gaze. The distant uivos sharpened, no longer mere echoes but a chorus laced with intent, closing in like wolves scenting weakness. Rival pack, or his own, come to drag the fallen heir back to judgment? Alara's pulse quickened, fear coiling tight in her gut, but beneath it stirred something fiercer, an Omega's resolve, forged in the fires of her own banishment. She had dragged him here, bound herself to his ruin. Fleeing now would unravel her as surely as the wind tore at the pines. Kale stirred, his silver eyes flickering open, clouded with pain but sharpening on her face. "They're coming," he murmured, voice rough as gravel under boot. His hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength, calluses rough against her chilled skin. The contact sent a shiver through her, not of cold, but of that denied pull, the instinctive thread that Omegas wove through chaos, mending what Alphas shattered. She rationalized it as necessity, nothing more. He was a shield against the night, and she his reluctant anchor. Yet empathy flickered, unbidden, in the way his gaze held hers. Not with command, but with a vulnerability that mirrored her own exile. The first growl shattered the gale's roar, low and predatory, echoing from the ridge above. Alara's breath hitched, her free hand fumbling for a jagged stone half buried in the snow, its edge biting into her palm like a promise of defiance. Kyle tensed, trying to rise, but agony twisted his features, forcing him back with a hiss. "Stay down," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The locket warmed, a subtle fire against the frost, as if the blood within whispered of battles long past. Her mother's line, guardians in the shadows, who had turned the tide with quiet ferocity. Footsteps crunched through the drifts, deliberate and circling, the scent of unfamiliar wolves thickening the air, iron and smoke laced with the acrid bite of ambition. Betrayers from the massacre's aftermath, perhaps, those who had whispered of Kale's failure at Frostvale Pass, where the invading hordes had painted the snow red with the blood of kin. Or scavengers drawn to the air's scent, eager to claim a trophy from the Alpha King's line. Alara's mind raced, piecing the fragments, the rival pack's incursions, the political webs spun in the longhouses where loyalty frayed like old rope. She had been cast out for her visions, branded a curse for foreseeing such shadows. Now they converged here, in this forsaken hollow. A silhouette broke the tree line, massive and furred, eyes gleaming amber in the moonlight. Not fully shifted, a hybrid form, deliberate, to toy with prey. It paused, nostrils flaring, then let out a bark that summoned two more, their forms hulking against the white expanse. Alara's heart thundered, a wild drum echoing the storm's fury, but she positioned herself before Kale, stone raised like a talisman. Fear clawed at her. These were no mere beasts, but enforcers of the wild's cruel hierarchy, enforcers of the power that had rejected her. Yet in shielding him, she felt the stir of something deeper, not just survival, but a choice. What was strength, if not standing in the gale for one who could not? Kyle's grip tightened, pulling her half behind him despite his weakness. "Run," he growled, the word laced with the ghost of command, his body coiling as if willing the shift that eluded him. But no fur rippled across his skin. Only sweat beaded on his brow, mixing with the snow's melt. Empathy bloomed in Alara then, sharp and visceral. She saw the guilt etched in his clenched jaw, the massacre's weight that had silenced his wolf, leaving him a man adrift in a beast's world. He, who had led charges under the moon's banner, now reduced to this, protected by the Omega his kind had discarded. The bond flickered, tentative, born of shared peril. Her touch on his arm steadied him, drawing a ragged breath from his lips. The lead wolf lunged, a blur of fangs and shadow, but Alara swung the stone with desperate precision, catching its flank in a spray of blood that steamed on the snow. It yelped, recoiling, and Kale surged forward on instinct, his human fist connecting with bone-crunching force. pain lanced through him, but he fought on, their movements sinking in the chaos. A dance of exile and air, her agility weaving through his raw power. The second attacker circled, but Ilara's cry pierced the night, raw and resonant, carrying the Omega's innate call that disrupted the fray. It faltered, ears flattening, as if her voice tugged at some buried thread of pack harmony. The third wolf hesitated, amber eyes flicking between them, then melted back into the storm with a whine, its companions following in disarray. The wind swallowed their retreat, leaving only the echo of paws on ice and the coppery scent of fresh blood, theirs and the enemy's, mingling like a pact sealed in crimson. Ilara collapsed beside Kale, chest heaving, the stone slipping from numb fingers. Her hands trembled as she checked his wounds, the locket now burning hot against her skin, its chain slick with sweat and melt. The blood within seemed to sing, a quiet hymn of resilience, binding their essences in this moment of reprieve. Kyle's head lolled toward her, silver eyes clearing, holding a depth that pierced her defenses. You fought. For me. Not accusation, but wonder, laced with the melancholy of one long burdened by duty. His fingers brushed the locket, lingering, as if sensing its pull. Empathy deepened into bond, subtle as moonlight on frost. She felt his guilt's weight, the massacre's ghosts that clawed at his soul, denying the full moon's embrace. And he, in turn, glimpsed her fracture. The rejection that had stripped her bare, yet forged this unyielding core. No words passed, only the shared warmth of their breaths, defying the cold. The storm eased to a whisper, the moon climbing higher, its light gilding the blood-streaked snow like veins of silver ore. In the hollow's fragile sanctuary, under the goddess's unyielding watch, Ilara realized the refuge was more than stone and shadow. It was the bridge they had forged, tentative and true, where fear yielded to the first fragile weave of trust. But the night held more trials. The full moon loomed, and with it, the revelations it demanded. For now, they rested, two exiles entwined against the wild's indifferent tide, the blood locket a silent witness to the bond taking root. The moon swelled to its zenith, a bloated orb of silver judgment suspended above the hollow, its light slicing through the thinning clouds like a blade tempered in the goddess's forge. Ilara lay beside Kale, their bodies pressed close in the alcove's scant shelter, the residue of battle clinging to them, dried blood flaking from skin like rust from ancient iron, the air heavy with the scent of pine sap and exertion salt. Her hand rested on his chest, feeling the erratic thunder of his heart, a rhythm that echoed the storm's fading growl. The blood locket dangled between them, its chain a cool thread against her fevered skin, now pulsing with an inner light that seemed to drink in the lunar glow. Exhaustion tugged at her edges, but sleep evaded her. The night's revelations stirred like embers beneath ash, demanding witness. Kale shifted slightly, a wince escaping his lips as the movement tugged at his wounds. His silver eyes, cleared of the haze, fixed on the locket, tracing its etched phases with a gaze sharpened by unspoken questions. It burns, he murmured, his voice a low rumble, resonant with the melancholy of one who had long carried the weight of unspoken failures. His fingers, tentative as a thief in moonlight, brushed the metal, and Ilara felt the jolt, a shared spark that raced through her veins, igniting memories not her own. Flashes, a mother's hands weaving spells in firelight, blood rites under ancient oaks, the locket as conduit for the Pathfinder's gift. She had always dismissed the visions as curses, the glimpses that had doomed her to exile. But now they surged, unbidden, painting the hollow's shadows with spectral clarity. The full moon's pull intensified, a tidal force wrenching at Kale's core. He arched against the stone, a guttural sound tearing from his throat. Not the wolf's howl, but a man's agony, raw and fracturing. Sweat beaded on his brow, freezing into crystalline trails that caught the light like tears of ice. It comes. The curse, he gasped, clutching at his side where the bandage wept fresh crimson. The massacre at Frostvale haunted him then, vivid as fresh wounds. The snow churned to muddied red, the cries of his packmates silenced by enemy blades, his orders that had led them into the slaughter. Guilt had locked his beast away, a self-imposed exile deeper than any borderland, denying the moon's embrace. He was no king in waiting, but a hollow vessel, adrift in the wild's merciless current. Ilara's instincts flared, the omega within her uncoiling like a serpent from slumber. She pressed her palm to the locket, willing calm into the chaos, but the metal grew scalding, its blood-tainted heart awakening with a fervor that blurred her sight. Visions cascaded, not fragments, but a torrent, pale as a pup, bounding through sun-dappled glades, the charge at Frostvale, his wolf form a silver blur amid the fray. The moment of breaking, when the last packmate fell, and his beast recoiled into silence, burying itself under layers of remorse. She saw the key to his redemption, not force, but forgiveness, a path woven through compassion's thorns. The Pathfinder's gift, inherited from her mother's line, manifested fully now, a seer's clarity, guiding the lost through moral tempests, revealing destinies etched in blood and starlight. Gasping, Ilara pulled back, her eyes wide with the weight of it. The hollow seemed to expand, the moon's light pooling around them like molten silver, illuminating the blood locket as it glowed faintly, veins of crimson threading its surface. "I see you," she whispered, her voice trembling with the awe of revelation. Not just his form, but his soul's fractures, the guilt that chained his wolf, the ethical king beneath the melancholy prince, torn between duty and despair. The air hummed with spiritual resonance, the wind whispering through the pines like the goddess's breath, carrying distant uivos that mourned and exhorted. Kyle's breath hitched, his hand covering hers on the locket, the contact forging a circuit of shared essence. Warmth flooded him, not the feral heat of shift, but a deeper thaw, melting the ice around his buried beast. Images flickered in his mind's eye, borrowed from her gift, Ilara's exile. The pack's rejection for visions that pierced their veils of denial. Her mother's right, blood offered to the moon for the power to mend what war rent asunder. He saw her as the key, the omega whose pathfinding light could unlock his curse, guiding him through the labyrinth of atonement. Not as savior, but as mirror, reflecting the mercy he had denied his fallen kin. You're the one," he rasped, wonder etching his features, silver eyes locking on hers with a depth that stripped away pretenses. The connection, once denied, bloomed visceral, her empathy threading his guilt, his resolve bolstering her fractured faith. But revelation carried its thorns. Ilara recoiled inwardly, fear clawing at the edges of awe. This gift had branded her outcast, a harbinger of truths too sharp for the pack's comfort. To embrace it now meant stepping into his world, risking further rejection for the sake of a destiny that demanded sacrifice. The locket cooled slightly, as if sensing her doubt, its glow fading to a subtle ember. What was strength, if not choosing to illuminate the dark, even when it burned? The moon bore witness, its light gilding their forms in ethereal armor, the snow around them pristine once more, save for the crimson petals of spilled blood that marked their trial. Kyle reached for her, not in command, but in quiet plea, his touch lingering on her wrist. The bond deepened, spiritual and profound, a lunar pact forged in the hollow's sanctity. He realized then, in the revelation's clarity, that she was no mere exile, but the thread of fate woven to redeem his line, the Alpha King's son, halted by Massacre's shadow, now glimpsing rebirth through her unyielding light. Yet doubt lingered in his melancholy gaze. Could he claim such mercy when his hands were stained with the blood of the fallen? The night stretched, heavy with possibility, The winds hush a canvas for the choices yet to unfold. As the moon began its descent, casting long shadows that entwined like lovers' limbs, Alara felt the gift settle within her. No longer curse, but compass. The blood locket rested quiet against her heart, a symbol of the paths they might tread together, toward healing or the greater storms of judgment ahead. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Dawn's pale fingers clawed at the horizon, bleeding faint gold into the moon's retreating silver as Alara and Kyle emerged from the hollow's embrace. The storm's remnants lingered in sodden drifts and splintered branches, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and lingering blood. His, hers. The intruders, a tapestry woven in crimson threads that the blood locket seemed to absorb, its surface etched deeper with the night's confessions. Alara's limbs ached from the vigil, her vision's afterglow a dull throb behind her eyes, but resolve armored her against the fatigue. Kale walked beside her, his steps measured, the wound at his side bound tighter now with strips torn from her cloak. Yet no shift mended it. His silver gaze, once fractured by isolation, now held a quiet fire, tempered by the revelation that bound them. The bond thrummed between them, subtle as a vein beneath skin, her pathfinder's light illuminating paths he had long forsaken. They crested the ridge, the borderlands unfolding below like a scarred battlefield, jagged peaks veined with frozen rivers, flanked by the shadowed eaves of the Eastern Pack's territory. Distant smoke curled from the longhouse spires, a beacon of the world that had rejected her and cursed him. Kyle's breath hitched, his hand brushing hers in unspoken anchor, the touch electric against the morning's chill. "They'll sense us," he murmured, voice laced with the melancholy of inevitability. The full moon's passage had cracked the ice around his wolf, but not shattered it. Guilt's chains lingered, demanding confrontation. Alara nodded, the locket warming at her throat, its blood stirring like a heartbeat urging her forward. Fear coiled in her gut. Not of the pack, but of the moral precipice ahead. To forgive the hierarchy that had broken them, or to sever it in war's name. The descent brought them to the tree line's edge, where centuries' howls shattered the fragile peace, summoning the tide of the past. Figures emerged from the mist, warriors in steel-gray furs, eyes gleaming with wary amber, led by Thorn, the Alpha's beta, and Kale's shadowed rival. Thorn's form was a monolith of muscle and scar, his black mane streaked with the white of old battles, a traitor cloaked in loyalty. Alara's visions had pierced his veil before her exile, whispers of ambition, deals struck with invaders at Frostvale's eve, blood traded for power. He had survived the massacre unscathed, his cunning weaving through the slaughter while Kale bore the blame. Now Thorn's gaze raked over them, lingering on Alara with predatory disdain, the Omega curse, returned with the air. "Kale!" Thorn growled, his voice a rumble like thunder over ice, circling with deliberate menace. The pack flanked him, a semicircle of fangs and suspicion, their scents a wall of musk and iron that pressed against Alara's senses. "The king summons his son. And you. Dragging this shadow back? The goddess weeps for such folly." His eyes flicked to the locket, as if sensing its pull, but mockery curled his lips. Kyle stepped forward, shielding her instinctively, his body tensing against the shift that teased but denied him. The air crackled with tension, the wind carrying uivos from the longhouse, calls of judgment laced with the political venom that had festered since Frostvale. Alara's heart pounded, a visceral drum echoing the pack's unrest. She felt their stares like blades, carving open the wounds of rejection, the Alpha's decree, the turned backs, the exile's lonely howl. The locket burned now, visions flickering at its edges. Thorn's betrayal unveiled in full. Maps traded under moonless skies, the rival pack's blades guided by his word, the massacre's blood on his hands as much as Kale's orders. Her gift demanded voice, a pathfinder's truth to cut through the lies, but freedom whispered retreat. Slip away, Leave this fractured world to its wars. Love, nascent and resisted, tugged the other way. Stand with Kale. Weave redemption from the ruins, even if it meant chaining herself to the pack's throne. Thorn lunged without warning, a blur of claw and fury, testing the air's broken form. Kale met him mid-stride. Human strength, fueled by Revelation's fire, their clash a storm of grunts and snow spray. Fists met flesh, blood arcing in fine mists that caught the dawn's light like rubies on white. Alara's cry pierced the fray, her Omega call rippling outward, disrupting the pack's advance. Some faltered, ears flattening against the innate harmony she evoked. But Thorn pressed on. His hybrid shift half emerging, fangs grazing Kale's shoulder in a spray of red that soaked the snow. "You led them to death," Thorn snarled, voice thick with accusation, but his eyes betrayed the fear of truths exposed. "The king knows your weakness, the wolf that fled." Kale staggered, pain lancing through him, but Alara surged forward, her hand clamping on Thorn's arm. The locket flaring hot as visions flooded her touch. She saw it all. The traitor's flight from the pass, leaving brothers to die, the forged reports blaming Kale's command, the Alpha King's ear poisoned for a rival's crown. "Liar," she breathed, her voice steady amid the chaos, the words carrying spiritual weight like moonlight piercing storm clouds. The pack murmured, doubt stirring as her gift's clarity rippled through the air, a lunar revelation binding truth to their instincts. Thorn recoiled, amber eyes widening in fury and fear, his form fully shifting to wolf in desperate bid for dominance. The confrontation swelled, warriors closing in, but Kale rose, bloodied yet unbowed, his hand finding Alara's. The bond ignited, her light threading his core, coaxing the wolf's growl from his throat, a faint echo, but enough to halt the tide. Thorn circled, a low snarl vibrating the frost, the choice crystallizing in the air. Forgiveness, to expose the traitor and heal the pack's fractures through mercy's blade. Or war, unleashing the rival's fury in a cascade of blood that would claim them all. Alara's soul tore. Love for Kale demanded she stay, guide him to atonement's throne, sacrificing her hard-won freedom. Liberty urged flight, letting the pack devour itself in deserved ruin. What was redemption, if not choosing compassion over vengeance, even when it bound you to the chains you fled? Thorn struck again, jaws snapping, but Kale twisted, driving him back with a roar that cracked the morning's hush. Alara's visions sharpened, revealing the Alpha King beyond the tree line, watching from shadows, his own guilt a mirror to his son's. The pack wavered, the moral dilemma etching their faces, loyalty to lies or truth's painful light. The locket pulsed like a second heart, its blood singing of ancient pacts. Omegas as bridges, not breakers, mending what power rent. Alara met Kyle's gaze amid the whirl, silver meeting dark, a silent vow forming. Forgiveness or war? The choice hung, heavy as the descending sun, the wind whispering of sacrifices yet to come, as the past's ghosts converged in a symphony of blood and shadowed allegiance. The clash ebbed, Thorn retreating with a defiant howl, but the pack's eyes lingered on Alara and Kale. Accusers turned witnesses, the judgment's weight shifting like snow under thaw. In that suspended breath, Alara felt the ethical precipice. To embrace love's redemption was to forgive the unforgivable, weaving her freedom into his crown. To choose liberty meant abandoning him to the wolves, her light dimmed in isolation. The blood locket cooled against her skin, a quiet sentinel, as the dawn fully broke, gilding the battlefield in gold and crimson, demanding her soul's verdict. The sun crested the peaks, its golden light fracturing across the bloodied snow like shards of a shattered vow, illuminating the fragile standoff in the borderland's cradle. Alara stood shoulder to shoulder with Kale, their breaths mingling in visible plumes against the chill, the air thick with the coppery residue of the fray and the pack's uneasy murmurs. Thorn's form melted into the tree line, a shadow fleeing the dawn's inexorable gaze, his howl fading into a wounded echo that stirred the pines like a dying wind. The warriors encircled them, their amber eyes flickering between suspicion and dawning clarity, the weight of Alara's visions hanging in the frost-laced air like unspoken accusations. The blood locket at her throat thrummed with a final, insistent warmth, its crimson core absorbing the morning's light, as if drinking in the essence of choices yet to be sealed. Cale's hand tightened around hers, his palm rough with scars that spoke of battles won and lost, his silver gaze locking onto the Alpha King who emerged from the shadows at last. The elder stood tall, a monolith of fur and iron, his mane streaked with the white of relentless winters, eyes like storm-tossed seas reflecting the guilt that mirrored his son's. No words passed between father and heir, only the silent communion of bloodlines fractured by Frostvale's massacre, where rivers of red had drowned the pack's unity. Alara felt the pull of it all, the king's hidden remorse for heeding Thorn's poisoned counsel, the political webs that had ensnared them, turning loyalty to betrayal. Her Pathfinder's gift surged, unbidden, painting the scene in visceral strokes. The elder's hand raised in futile command amid the slaughter, the moment he had chosen silence over truth, letting Cale bear the crown of failure alone. The pack shifted, restless, their howls softening to low whines that carried the scent of thawing ice, doubt cracking the hierarchy's frozen facade. Ilara's heart hammered, a wild cadence against her ribs, torn between the freedom of flight and the sacrificial weave of love's redemption. To expose Thorn fully would ignite war, spilling more blood into the snow, chaining her light to the throne's thorns. To forgive, to guide them toward healing, meant surrendering her exile's hard-won solitude, binding her destiny to Cale's shadowed reign. The locket burned hotter, its chain a tether pulling her toward him, the blood within whispering of ancient pacts, Omegas as healers, not conquerors, mending the wild's wounds through compassion's quiet fire. What was faith, if not stepping into the abyss for one whose soul echoed your own fractures? Destiny versus liberty, the moral scales tipped in the wind's hush, demanding her verdict. "I see the truth," Alara said, her voice rising clear and resonant, cutting through the dawn like moonlight piercing storm clouds. The words carried the weight of her gift, rippling outward in a spiritual wave that stilled the pack's unrest. Visions cascaded from her, shared in the air's electric hum. Thorn's clandestine meetings under eclipsed skies, maps etched with invasion routes, the traitor's blade guiding the enemy through Frostvale's pass while Cale's forces bled in vain. Gasps echoed from the warriors, their forms tensing as the revelations pierced their veils. Thorn, not Cale, the architect of the massacre's tide. The Alpha King's face crumpled, silver eyes widening with the agony of recognition, his broad shoulders sagging under the burden he had long displaced. Cale stepped forward, releasing Alara's hand only to draw her closer, his body a shield woven from resolve. The wolf within him stirred at last, a faint growl rumbling from his chest, fur prickling along his arms in tentative promise. No full shift, but the curse's chains fracturing under her light's unyielding pressure. "Father," he said, voice steady with the melancholy of atonement. "The blood on our snow is shared. Thorn's ambition poisoned us all. But war, it devours what remains." His words hung heavy, laced with ethical depth, the heir's duty clashing against the king's hidden shame. The pack murmured, loyalty fraying like mist in sunlight, some baring throats in submission, others glancing toward the tree line where Thorn's scent lingered like a ghost. The Alpha King nodded once, a gesture carved from stone, his gaze shifting to Alara, the Omega once branded curse, now the beacon unveiling their ruins. You were cast out for truths we feared, he rumbled, the admission tasting of blood and regret. Return, mend what we broke. But Ilara felt the precipice's edge. Acceptance meant sacrifice, her freedom offered on the altar of pack harmony, her visions no longer solitary, but bound to their throne. Love for Kale bloomed fierce in that moment. Not as reward, but as proof. Resisted through fear, rationalized in exile, now accepted in the raw forge of choice. She pressed the locket to her lips, tasting the metallic echo of her mother's right, and chose, not war's vengeance, but compassion's cure, weaving redemption from the threads of their shared despair. As the sun climbed higher, gilding the snow in warm amber, Kale's wolf emerged fully under the bond's pull, a silver form rippling across his skin, healing wounds in a cascade of fur and muscle. He shifted seamlessly, the curse shattered, his howl joining the pack's chorus in triumphant harmony. Ilara stood unmoved, her hand on his flank, the locket cooling to a gentle ember against her heart. The Alpha King knelt, a symbolic bow to the Pathfinder's light, and the pack followed, their weavos rising like a hymn to the goddess, sealing the union in lunar witness. Thorn's shadow fled into exile, the traitor's web unraveled, but peace came not as conquest, but as rebirth. Ilara's freedom transmuted into purpose, Kale's guilt alchemized into strength, their love a bridge spanning rejection's chasm. In the longhouse's shadow, as flames crackled against the encroaching dusk, Ilara traced the locket's phases, its blood now a quiet guardian of their renascimento. The wild had claimed them both, broken and remade under the moon's eternal gaze. Strength was mercy chosen in the storm, redemption forged in the fire of what was lost. And in that union, the borderlands breathed anew, snow melting to reveal the green pulse of spring beneath. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.